Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation. Devin Bacon had learned patience the hard way. 12 years on the Detroit Police Department's Homicide Division taught him that justice wasn't about quick draws or dramatic confrontations. It was about building airtight cases brick by brick. Now, at 42, he ran his own security consulting firm from a modest office in suburban Michigan, analyzing corporate vulnerabilities and conducting background checks. The pay was better, the hours more predictable, and he got to watch his 9-year-old son Jake grow up. He'd met Brenda Dennis at a charity gala 7 years ago. She'd been working as an executive assistant at Dunbar Industries, a mid-sized manufacturing company specializing in industrial components. Beautiful, ambitious, with auburn hair that caught the light just right and a smile that seemed genuine. They married within a year. Jake came along 14 months later, a bright-eyed boy who loved baseball and comic books. Devin had noticed the changes about 8 months ago. Brenda's late nights increased. Her phone became a guarded object, face down on every surface, password protected with a complexity that seemed excessive. She'd started going to the gym religiously, upgraded her wardrobe, and developed a sudden enthusiasm for her boss's various company events. Clinton Dunbar's events. Clinton Dunbar was everything Devin wasn't. Inherited wealth, Ivy League pedigree, the kind of polished arrogance that came from never facing real consequences. He'd taken over Dunbar Industries from his father and ran it with ruthless efficiency. Brenda spoke about him often. Too often. Clinton thinks this, and Clinton says that peppered her conversations like unwanted seasoning. Devin had done what any former detective would do. He investigated quietly. Discreet surveillance. Digital forensics on their shared computer that revealed deleted browser histories pointing to affair advice forums. Credit card statements showing hotel charges on days she claimed to be at client meetings. He documented everything in a locked file at his office, building his case with the same methodical approach that had closed 47 murder investigations. But he'd held back from confronting her. Something told him to wait to see how deep this went. His instincts, honed over a dozen years of reading liars and sociopaths, whispered that there was more to this than simple infidelity. That Tuesday morning, Devin had breakfast with Jake, chocolate chip pancakes, the kid's favorite. Brenda rushed through the kitchen in a designer suit, kissing Jake's forehead without breaking stride. "Big presentation today," she said, grabbing her keys. "Don't wait up tonight." "Good luck," Devin replied, watching his son's face fall slightly. Jake had stopped asking his mother to his baseball games 2 months ago, tired of the rejections. After dropping Jake at Riverside Elementary, Devin spent the morning working a case for a law firm, analyzing security footage of a warehouse theft. Tedious work, but it paid well. He was reviewing timestamps when his phone rang at 1:47 p.m. "Mr. Bacon, this is Principal Courtney Sanders at Riverside Elementary. Jay collapsed during recess. The paramedics are taking him to St. Mary's Hospital. You need to come immediately." The world tilted. Devin's training kicked in. Stay calm, get facts, act decisively. He was in his car within 90 seconds, calling Brenda as he sped toward the hospital. She answered on the 4th ring. Background noise, laughter, clinking glasses, music. "Devin, I'm kind of busy. Jake collapsed at school. They're taking him to St. Mary's ER. Silence. Then, "Oh God, is he okay?" "I don't know. I'm heading there now." "Where are you?" It's Clinton's birthday lunch. The whole executive team is here. It's important." Devin's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "Our son is in an ambulance." I know, but I can't just leave. Clinton's announcing the new VP promotions. I've worked toward this for months. You're closer anyway. You handle it. Call me with updates." The line went dead. Devin drove in silence, his mind cataloging this moment with crystal clarity. Not our son might be dying, but I can't leave the party. Now I'm on my way, but you handle it. He'd been a fool to wait. Chapter 2. The Collapse. St. Mary's Hospital emergency room was controlled chaos. Devin badged his way through with the directness of someone who'd spent years navigating bureaucracy, finding Jake in Bay 7. His son lay unconscious, an oxygen mask over his small face, for lines snaking into his arm. Dr. Margaret Arnold, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, was reviewing charts with two nurses. "Mr. Bacon?" She gestured him to a consultation area outside the bay. "I'm Dr. Arnold. Jake's stable for now, but we're running extensive tests. His collapse wasn't a simple faint. His symptoms suggest possible poisoning. Poisoning? His blood work shows elevated levels of certain compounds. We've sent samples to toxicology, but it'll take time. Has he eaten anything unusual? Been around chemicals?" Devin's mind raced. Normal breakfast at home. School lunch. Nothing unusual. We'll keep him for observation. The next few hours are critical. Devin sat beside Jake's bed, holding his son's small hand. The boy's breathing was shallow but steady. Rage built in Devin's chest. Not the hot, explosive kind, but the cold, calculating fury that made him dangerous when he'd been a cop. Someone had done this. Someone had hurt his child. His phone buzzed. "Brenda, how is he?" Devin typed back. "Unconscious. Possible poisoning. Still at lunch?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, "OMG. I'll get there when I can. Keep me posted. Not I'm leaving right now. Not I'm sorry. Just when I can." 2 hours later, Detective Kurt Monroe arrived with a younger officer. Devin knew Kurt from his police days. Solid investigator, played things by the book. "Devin," Kurt said, his expression grim. "We need to talk. Principal Sanders called us when the paramedics mentioned possible poisoning. School security footage shows something you need to see." They moved to a private conference room. Kurt pulled out a tablet, queued up the footage. "This is from the school's main entrance, 7:52 a.m. this morning." The video showed the usual morning drop-off chaos. Then Brenda's silver Lexus pulled up. But she didn't just drop Jake off. She got out, walked him to the entrance, and handed him something. A small bottle. Jake drank from it, handed it back, and she quickly returned to her car. "Keep watching," Kurt said. The footage jumped to the parking lot camera. Brenda's car sat there for another 10 minutes. She was on her phone, animated conversation. Then she pulled out the bottle, wiped it down with what looked like a cloth, and put it in her purse. "We found this in the trash near her parking spot at Dunbar Industries." Kurt placed an evidence bag on the table. Inside was a small blue sports drink bottle. "Maintenance found it this afternoon. Still had residue. We're testing it now, but I'd bet my badge it's the source." Devin's world crystallized into sharp focus. His wife. His wife had poisoned their son. "There's more," Kurt continued. "We did some preliminary checking. Jake's life insurance policy was increased to $500,000 3 months ago. Brenda's the sole beneficiary if anything happens while you're indisposed." Indisposed? We pulled phone records with a warrant. Brenda's been in contact with a guy named Sergio Orozco. He's got priors for assault, attempted murder. Their last call was yesterday, 37 minutes. The pieces assembled themselves. Not just an affair, not just wanting out of the marriage. They were planning to kill Jake for the insurance money, and likely Devin too. Make it look like accidents. Grieving widow walks away with life insurance, probably straight into Clinton Dunbar's arms. "Where is she now?" Devin asked, his voice eerily calm. "Still at Dunbar Industries. We're getting a warrant for her arrest, but we need the tox screen to confirm. Another few hours." "Devin," Kurt leaned forward. "I know what you're thinking. Let's handle this. By the book." Devin looked at his friend, then back at the tablet screen, frozen on Brenda's face as she wiped down the bottle. "Of course," he said. "By the book." But Kurt knew him well enough to catch the lie. Chapter 3. The investigation begins. Jake woke up at 11 p.m., groggy and confused. Dr. Arnold confirmed the toxicology results. A carefully calibrated dose of rat poison mixed with antifreeze, enough to cause severe symptoms, but administered in a quantity that suggested the poisoner wanted a slow, agonizing death that could be blamed on mysterious illness. They'd pumped his stomach and started chelation therapy. He'd recover, but it would take time. Brenda arrived at 11:30 p.m., playing the distraught mother with practiced precision. Devin watched her performance with clinical detachment. The tears that came on cue, the trembling hands, the "oh my baby" routine. She'd always been a good actress. Where were you? Devin asked flatly. The lunch ran late, then I had to finish the presentation. I came as soon as I could. She reached for Jake's hand. Devin intercepted her, gripping her wrist firmly. Don't touch him. Her eyes flashed with something. Fear? Anger? Devin, what's wrong with you? The police are coming to arrest you. They have footage of you giving Jake the poison this morning. They have the bottle. They know about the insurance policy. Brenda's face went through a remarkable transformation. Shock, calculation, then cold fury. The mask dropped completely. You can't prove anything. That footage could show anything. I gave him a sports drink because he wanted it. The bottle they found in your office building trash? The one you wiped down. I want a lawyer. You'll need several. Detective Monroe arrived with 2 uniformed officers. Brenda Bacon, you're under arrest for attempted murder of a minor, conspiracy to commit murder, and child endangerment. The Miranda rights followed, mechanical and final. As they led her away in handcuffs, she turned to Devin. Clinton will have me out by morning. His lawyers are the best. You'll never prove this was intentional. We'll see, Devin replied. After she was gone, Devin returned to Jake's bedside. His son was sleeping again, peaceful now despite the IVs and monitors. Jesse Graves arrived an hour later, Devin's former partner from his detective days, now running his own private investigation firm. Got your message, Jesse said. He was a big man, 6'3", and built like a linebacker, with a shaved head and a scar across his left eyebrow from a domestic violence call gone sideways. What do you need? Everything on Clinton Dunbar and Sergio Orozco. Financials, communications, movements for the last 6 months. And I need it yesterday. Jesse pulled out a tablet. Already started when I heard. Clinton Dunbar, age 45, net worth approximately $80 million, runs Dunbar Industries. Clean record, but that's not surprising for rich guys. Sergio Orozco, age 34, enforcer for hire. Did 5 years for manslaughter out on parole. He's been doing odd jobs, mostly intimidation, collection work. Connection to Dunbar? Working on it. But here's something interesting. Jesse pulled up a document. Dunbar Industries is in financial trouble. Not public knowledge yet, but they're hemorrhaging money. A major contract fell through last quarter. Clinton's been liquidating personal assets quietly. So he needs money. Desperately. And your wife's life insurance policy on Jake isn't the only one. She took out a $2 million policy on you 4 months ago. Devin absorbed this. They were going to kill us both. Take the insurance money and disappear together. Looks that way. But here's where it gets interesting. Jesse leaned in closer. Sergio Orozco isn't just muscle. He's smart. Former military. Dishonorable discharge for excessive force. He knows how to make things look like accidents. I found communication between an encrypted number we traced to Dunbar and Orozco dating back 8 months. They were planning something big. Devin's phone buzzed. Kurt Monroe, Brenda made bail. Dunbar's lawyer got her out an hour ago. She's at a hotel downtown. Ankle monitor can't leave the county, but she's out. Of course she is, Devin muttered. He looked at Jesse. I need you to do something that might cross some legal lines. Jesse grinned. My favorite kind of work. I need complete surveillance on Brenda, Clinton, and Orozco. Phones, emails, physical location, everything. I need to know what they're planning next. They'll lawyer up, stop communicating. No, Devin said, a plan forming in his mind. They're arrogant. They think they've won because she's out on bail. They'll make mistakes. And when they do, I'll be ready. What are you planning? Devin looked at his sleeping son, then back at Jesse. I'm going to destroy them. Not just jail. I'm going to take everything they have, everyone they care about, and burn it to the ground. But I need to be smart, patient, build the case brick by brick. The Devin Bacon special. Exactly. Over the next 3 days, while Jake recovered under hospital supervision, Devin built his operation. He took a leave of absence from his firm, set up a command center in his home office, and started gathering intelligence. Jesse's team, 3 former cops and 2 tech specialists, provided round-the-clock surveillance. They discovered that Brenda had moved into Clinton's mansion in the affluent Windermere neighborhood. The ankle monitor restricted her movements, but Clinton visited her daily. Sergio Roscoe was spotted at the mansion twice. The communications Jesse intercepted painted a clear picture. Clinton and Brenda had been planning this for nearly a year. The affair started as a simple office romance, but when Clinton's company started failing, it evolved into something darker. Brenda suggested the insurance scheme: kill her family, claim the money, and use it to save Clinton's business. In return, she'd become his wife and partner. Sergio was the hired gun, brought in to make Devin's death look accidental. The plan was to poison Jake first, make it look like a tragic illness, collect that insurance, then stage a home invasion gone wrong, where Devin would be killed. Brenda would play the traumatized widow, and no one would question it. But Jake's collapse at school had forced them to accelerate. The poisoning had been meant to be slower, untraceable. Brenda's panic when Jake collapsed immediately had made her sloppy. Now, they were cornered and dangerous. On the fourth day, Jake was released from the hospital. Devin took him to a safe house, a cabin owned by Jesse's brother in the northern woods, 3 hours from Detroit. He hired private security, former military contractors who owed Jesse favors. Jake would be safe there while Devin finished this. "Dad, why can't Mom visit?" Jake asked as Devin tucked him in the first night. Devin sat on the edge of the bed, choosing his words carefully. "Mom did something very bad, buddy. She hurt you. Do you remember her giving you a drink that morning?" Jake nodded slowly. "She said it was a special vitamin drink to help me be strong. That drink made you sick. Very sick. Mom put bad stuff in it." Jake's eyes welled with tears. "Why would Mom hurt me?" It was the question that tore at Devin's heart. "I don't know, son, but I promise you, I'm going to make sure she never hurts you again. And I'm going to make sure the people who helped her pay for what they did." Chapter 4. The trap is set. Devin returned to Detroit with a clarity of purpose he hadn't felt since his police days. Kurt Monroe kept him updated on the official investigation. Brenda's lawyer was building a defense, claiming the poisoning was accidental, that she'd grabbed the wrong bottle that morning, that the insurance policies were standard financial planning. Clinton Dunbar's high-priced legal team was creating separation between him and Brenda, claiming they were just employer and employee, nothing more. But Devin had always been better at the long game than the system allowed. He started with reconnaissance. Jesse's surveillance had mapped Clinton's routine: morning run at 6 a.m., office by 8, business lunches, evening drinks at the Monarch Club downtown, home by 8 p.m. Brenda's ankle monitor kept her confined to Clinton's mansion, but she wasn't idle. Phone records showed she was coordinating with a different lawyer, someone who specialized in getting charges dismissed on technicalities. Sergio Orozco was the wild card. He'd gone aground after Brenda's arrest, but Jesse's team tracked him to a rundown apartment in southwest Detroit. He was still on Dunbar's payroll, waiting for instructions. Devin decided to exploit their greatest weakness: arrogance. He called a press conference, something he'd learned from his years working high-profile cases. With Kurt's reluctant blessing, he stood before cameras and delivered a calculated performance. "My name is Devin Bacon. 2 weeks ago, my wife Brenda poisoned our 9-year-old son in an attempt to kill him for insurance money. She's currently out on bail, living with her lover Clinton Dunbar, who we believe helped plan the murder. The system is allowing wealthy criminals to buy their freedom while my son recovers from being poisoned by his own mother." The media erupted. Within hours, it was the top story. Clinton's business partners started calling for explanations. Brenda's lawyer demanded a retraction. But the damage was done. Public opinion had turned venomous. That night, Jesse's surveillance caught Clinton and Brenda arguing in the mansion study. "You told me this would be clean." Clinton's voice, enhanced by the parabolic microphone aimed at the window. "It would have been if you hadn't rushed me. I told you we needed more time." "We don't have time. The business is hemorrhaging money. The board is asking questions. If we don't get that insurance money soon, I'm bankrupt." "Well, maybe you should have thought of that before pushing me to poison a child in broad daylight." Devin listened to the recording with grim satisfaction. They were fracturing. Fear made people stupid. He made his next move. Through a series of anonymous tips to the SEC, he revealed irregularities in Dunbar Industries' financial statements. Not fraud that Clinton had committed, but suspicious enough to trigger an investigation. The The board of directors received the same information. Within days, Clinton was suspended pending review. The pressure was mounting. Then came the night that changed everything. Devin was in his home office when Jesse called. "We got a problem. Orozco just left his apartment, armed. He's heading toward your neighborhood." Devin checked the security monitors. His house had cameras on every angle, motion sensors, and reinforced doors. Paranoia from his cop days paying dividends. "I see him. 2 blocks out. Police are en route. ETA 8 minutes. Too long." Devin opened his safe, pulled out his Glock 19. He'd maintained his firearms qualifications, shooting at the range monthly. Let him come. Sergio Orozco was good, Devin admitted. He bypassed the front entrance, approaching from the wooded backyard, using shadows and blind spots. But Devin had designed this security system himself. He tracked Orozco's approach on thermal imaging, watched him pick the lock on the rear door with professional efficiency. Devin waited in the darkened kitchen, gun drawn, breathing controlled. The door eased open. Orozco stepped inside, weapon raised, a suppressed pistol, professional grade. "Drop it," Devin said from the shadows, his gun aimed at center mass. Orozco spun, fast but not fast enough. Devin fired twice, one round into Orozco's shoulder, spinning him, the second into his thigh. The intruder collapsed, his gun clattering away. Devin kicked the weapon aside, zip-tied Orozco's hands behind his back, then applied pressure to the leg wound to prevent him from bleeding out. "Who sent you? Clinton or Brenda?" Orozco laughed, blood on his teeth. "You're dead anyway, cop. You just don't know it yet. We'll see." Police arrived 4 minutes later. Kurt Monroe supervised the scene personally. Sergio Orozco was taken to the hospital under armed guard, charged with attempted murder, breaking and entering, and weapons violations. But the real treasure was Orozco's phone, which Devin had pocketed before the police arrived. A burner, but not wiped. Jesse's tech specialist cracked it within hours. The messages were damning. Clinton had ordered the hit personally, offering $200,000 for Devin's death to be staged as a home invasion. Brenda had approved the plan, even suggested the timing. Devin had what he needed for the official prosecution. But he wasn't done. Chapter 5, Unraveling Threads. With Sergio Orozco in custody and his phone providing ironclad evidence, the prosecutor's office moved to arrest Clinton Dunbar. But Clinton's lawyers had anticipated this. By the time the warrant was issued, Clinton had liquidated remaining assets and fled to his family's estate in the Cayman Islands, a non-extradition country for certain financial crimes. Brenda, still under house arrest via ankle monitor, became the sole target of prosecution. But without Clinton to testify against, her lawyers were confident they could create reasonable doubt. The trial was set for 6 weeks out. Devin sat in Kurt Monroe's office, studying the case file. He ran. "Cowards move," Kurt agreed. "But he's smart. The Caymans won't extradite for conspiracy charges without concrete evidence. He personally ordered the hit. We have Orozco's phone, which his lawyers will argue was manipulated or faked. Without Clinton here to confirm, it's circumstantial." Devin leaned back, thinking. Clinton Dunbar had one weakness: his ego. The man had spent his life as the smartest person in every room, playing chess while others played checkers. But Devin had spent 12 years anticipating the moves of murderers and sociopaths. He knew how to play the long game. "What if we bring him back?" Devin said. "How? We can't touch him in the Caymans." "We don't have to. We just need to make him think he's won." Over the next 2 weeks, Devin orchestrated a carefully staged collapse. Through intermediaries and planted news stories, he created the narrative that the prosecution's case was falling apart. The evidence against Brenda was being challenged on technical grounds. Orozco's phone might be inadmissible due to chain of custody issues. Without Clinton's testimony, Brenda might walk. Jesse's team planted false information in legal forums that Brenda's lawyer frequented, suggesting that if Clinton stayed away for just a few more months, the whole case would likely be dismissed. The statute of limitations, jurisdictional technicalities, the works. Clinton took the bait. Jesse's contacts in the Caymans reported that Clinton had started making plans to return. He'd been living in exile, cut off from his business and social circle, watching his empire crumble from afar. The prospect of coming home to freedom and rebuilding was too tempting. But Devon's real masterstroke was the financial angle. Through a series of shell companies and anonymous purchases, he'd been quietly buying up Dunbar Industries, stock at pennies on the dollar, as the company collapsed. He now controlled 42% of the company, not quite controlling interest, but close. He arranged a board meeting, showing up as the surprise majority stakeholder with Jesse and a team of corporate lawyers. The remaining board members, desperate to save their investments, listened to his proposal, restructure the company, install new leadership, and most importantly, cooperate fully with authorities regarding Clinton Dunbar's activities. The company's internal documents revealed a pattern of financial misconduct that went beyond the insurance scheme. Clinton had been cooking the books for years, using company funds for personal expenses, bribing officials for contracts. The SEC investigation that Devon had triggered uncovered layers of criminal activity. Armed with this new evidence, federal prosecutors issued an updated warrant for Clinton Dunbar, this time for securities fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering, crimes that the Cayman Islands would extradite for. Clinton's lawyers, seeing the writing on the wall, negotiated his return. He flew back to Detroit on a Tuesday morning, expecting to surrender, make bail, and fight the charges with his legal team. Instead, he was arrested at the airport and denied bail due to flight risk. The evidence was overwhelming. The company's CFO, granted immunity, testified that Clinton had personally ordered the fraudulent transactions. The SEC had frozen all his accounts. His mansion was seized as proceeds of criminal activity. Clinton Dunbar, who'd lived his entire life in luxury, was now in a county jail cell, wearing an orange jumpsuit and facing 40 years in federal prison. Devon watched the arrest on the news from Jake's hospital room. His son was there for a follow-up examination, healthy and healing. "Is that the bad man?" Jake asked. "One of them," Devon replied. "The other one goes on trial next week." Chapter 6. The Trial. Brenda's trial began on a cold Monday in November. The prosecution had a strong case. The security footage, the poison bottle with her fingerprints, the insurance policies, the intercepted communications with Clinton and Orozco. But her lawyer, a sharp woman named Lee Sargent, was mounting an aggressive defense. Devon sat in the gallery every day, stone-faced, as Lee argued that Brenda was a victim of Clinton's manipulation, that she'd been coerced, threatened, psychologically abused into participating in a scheme she didn't fully understand, that the communications were taken out of context, that Clinton had acted alone and was trying to frame Brenda for his crimes. It was a clever strategy, and it might have worked if Devon hadn't prepared for it. On the third day of trial, the prosecution called a surprise witness, Dr. Robert Hogan, a forensic psychologist who'd spent 20 hours interviewing Brenda during her jail stay after violating her house arrest conditions by attempting to contact Clinton. Dr. Hogan testified that Brenda exhibited clear signs of narcissistic personality disorder with antisocial features. She showed no genuine remorse for poisoning Jake, only regret at being caught. During their sessions, she'd repeatedly blamed her son for ruining everything by collapsing too quickly. She'd shown no empathy, no emotional connection to the harm she'd caused. "In my professional opinion," Dr. Hogan stated, "Ms. Bacon is a calculated, manipulative individual who viewed her son as an obstacle to financial gain. Her actions were premeditated and intentional." The courtroom buzzed. Lee Sargent objected strenuously, but the testimony stood. The jury's expressions shifted from sympathy to disgust. But Devon's coup de grace came on day 5. Jesse had been working another angle, tracking Brenda's digital footprint. While she'd been careful to delete communications with Clinton and Orozco, she'd made a critical mistake. She'd kept a journal on a password-protected app on her tablet. The journal detailed everything. Her growing resentment toward Devon for settling into a boring middle-class life. Her attraction to Clinton's wealth and power. Her discovery of his financial troubles, and her realization that she could solve both their problems with a simple murder-for-insurance scheme. The journal even included practice drafts of what she'd say to police if caught, all written months before Jake's poisoning. Entry from 3 months before the incident. Jake is worth more to me dead than alive. $500,000 is just the start. Once the cops rule it natural causes, we could do Devin next. $2 million from his policy. Start fresh. Clinton and I can finally be together without the dead weight. Jesse had obtained the tablet through a perfectly legal warrant served on Brenda's cloud storage provider. The journal was authenticated by digital forensics experts. The prosecution entered it into evidence. Lee Sargent tried to challenge it, arguing privacy violations, but the judge allowed it. The journal entries were read aloud in court. Brenda's careful mask of victimhood shattered as the jury heard her own words describing her son as dead weight and planning her husband's murder with clinical detachment. Devin watched Brenda's face as the journal was read. For the first time, she looked genuinely afraid. She thought she could charm or manipulate her way out, but her own words condemned her. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts: attempted murder of a minor, conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, child endangerment. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge, a stern woman named Judith Rivers who had grandchildren Jake's age, showed no mercy. Mrs. Bacon, you violated the most fundamental bond that exists, the bond between mother and child. You poisoned your own son for money. You planned to murder your husband. You showed no remorse, no humanity. This court sentences you to 45 years in state prison without possibility of parole for 30 years. Brenda finally broke, screaming that it wasn't fair, that Clinton had forced her, that they were all against her. Bailiffs dragged her from the courtroom as she hurled curses and threats. Devin felt no satisfaction in her breakdown, only a cold certainty that justice had been served. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed him. He gave a brief statement. My son is safe. The people who tried to kill him are in prison. That's all that matters. But he was lying. There was one more piece to put in place. Chapter 7, the final piece. Clinton Dunbar's federal trial was set for January, but Devin knew the man would never make it that far. Not in the way that mattered. Through Jesse's network, Devin learned that Clinton had been placed in general population at the county jail, a bureaucratic oversight that would normally be corrected for someone of his wealth and status. But Devin had quietly ensured, through certain contacts in the correctional system who owed him favors, that the paperwork to transfer Clinton to protective custody got delayed. County jail general population was a dangerous place for wealthy, white-collar criminals. The other inmates, many of them fathers who'd lost custody of their children, men who'd grown up in poverty, didn't take kindly to rich men who poisoned kids for insurance money. Clinton lasted 3 days before requesting protective custody. But by then, the damage was done. He'd been beaten twice, had his commissary stolen daily, and lived in constant fear. The man who'd lived in a mansion was now sleeping on a thin mattress in a 6x8 cell, jumping at every shadow. But Devin's revenge went deeper than physical discomfort. Jesse's investigation into Dunbar Industries had revealed something interesting. Clinton had a sister, Whitney Draper, who ran a non-profit foundation for children's literacy. She'd built her reputation on being the good Dunbar, distancing herself from her brother's corporate ruthlessness. She'd been vocal in the media about cutting ties with Clinton after his arrest. But Jesse discovered that Whitney had known about the financial fraud for months. She'd received payments from Clinton's shell companies, laundered through her foundation. She'd been complicit in the fraud, even if she hadn't been involved in the murder plot. Devin anonymously provided this information to federal investigators. Whitney was arrested on charges of money laundering and conspiracy to commit fraud. Her nonprofit was shut down. Her reputation was destroyed. Clinton's parents, elderly and horrified by their son's actions, issued a public statement disowning him and cutting off all financial support. The Dunbar family name, which had been respected in Detroit business circles for 3 generations, was now synonymous with greed and child murder. Devin's takeover of Dunbar Industries was completed through bankruptcy court. He restructured it, renamed it Riverside Manufacturing, after Jake's school, and made it profitable again by cutting the corruption and restoring ethical business practices. The company's revival made headlines. The detective who'd exposed the murderous CEO, now saving the company and its jobs. But the personal victory came in February. Clinton's trial proceeded without much drama. The evidence was overwhelming. His lawyers negotiated a plea deal, 40 years in federal prison in exchange for full cooperation and asset forfeiture. Clinton took it, knowing he'd die in prison either way. The day Clinton was sentenced, Devin visited him in the federal holding facility. It was against protocol, but Kurt Monroe arranged it as a personal favor. They sat across from each other in a small room, separated by plexiglass. Clinton looked haggard, his expensive haircut grown out, his tan faded, eyes hollow. "You destroyed everything," Clinton said, his voice flat. "My company, my family, my life." "You tried to kill my son," Devin replied calmly. "Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences? I could have made bail, fought this, if you hadn't manipulated the system." "I didn't manipulate anything. I just played the game better than you. You thought you were untouchable because you had money and lawyers. But you forgot something important." "What's that?" Devin leaned forward. "I spent 12 years studying people like you. I know how you think, how you move, how you fall. You were playing checkers. I was playing chess." Clinton's face twisted with rage. "When I get out, you won't. You'll die in prison. Your sister will die in prison. Brenda will die in prison. And every day you're in there, you'll know that the boring security consultant you dismissed destroyed your entire world because you made one mistake. You came after my family." Devin stood to leave. "One more thing," he added. "Dunbar Industries. Sorry, Riverside Manufacturing. We just landed the contract your company lost last year. The one that started your financial problems. We're profitable now. Growing. I'm using the profits to establish a trust fund for children who've been victims of parental abuse. Jake wanted to call it the Second Chance Fund. I thought that was fitting." He walked out, leaving Clinton staring at the plexiglass, the magnitude of his defeat finally sinking in. Chapter 8. Aftermath. Spring came to Michigan with the usual tentative warmth. Jake, now 10 years old, had recovered fully from the poisoning. The nightmares had faded with therapy, replaced by a cautious optimism. He'd started playing baseball again, his first love, and Devin never missed a game. Devin had sold their old house, too many bad memories, and bought a smaller place closer to Jesse's neighborhood. It had a big backyard where Jake could practice his pitching and a front porch where Devin could drink his coffee and watch the morning traffic. Riverside Manufacturing was thriving. Devin had hired a CEO to run daily operations, a sharp woman named Angela Liu who'd turned around failing companies before. He stayed on as chairman, focusing on strategy and ensuring the company maintained ethical standards. The Second Chance Fund had already helped 43 children escape abusive situations, providing legal support, counseling, and financial assistance. Sergio Orozco had taken a plea deal, testifying against both Clinton and Brenda in exchange for 20 years instead of life. He'd be eligible for parole in 12. Devin had attended every hearing, every proceeding, ensuring the deals were as harsh as legally possible. But the real victory was smaller, more personal. One Saturday morning in April, Devin was teaching Jake how to throw a curveball in the backyard. The kid had a good arm, natural athlete instincts. "Dad," Jake said, catching the ball Devin tossed back. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything, buddy. Do you still love Mom?" Devin had known this question would come eventually. He sat down on the porch steps, and Jake joined him. "I love the person I thought she was," Devin said carefully. "But that person never really existed. She was pretending to be someone she wasn't. The real her, no, I don't love who she really is. Is it my fault she hurt me?" "No." Devin put his arm around his son. "Nothing you did caused this. Some people are broken inside in ways we can't fix. Your mom is one of those people. It's not your fault. It's not my fault. It's just the way she is." Jake nodded slowly, processing this. "I'm glad you caught her." "Me too. Are you going to find a new mom for me?" Devin smiled. "Maybe someday. But right now, it's just you and me, kid. And I think we're doing pretty okay." "We're doing great, Dad." They threw the ball back and forth as the sun climbed higher. Father and son, survivors of a nightmare that had tried to destroy them and failed. That evening, Kurt Monroe stopped by with a six-pack of beer. They sat on the porch while Jake played video games inside. Clinton tried to appeal his sentence. Kurt said, "Denied. He's being transferred to a maximum security facility in Texas next month. Brenda's at the Women's Correctional in Ypsilanti. She's already had 3 disciplinary violations for fighting." "Good," Devin said. "You did it by the book, mostly." "I'm impressed." "Mostly." Kurt grinned. The tablet with Brenda's journal. Jesse's warrant was technically valid, but the timing was suspiciously perfect. Like you knew exactly when to look and where. "Can't prove anything." "Don't want to. Sometimes the system needs help. You just made sure justice actually got served." Kurt took a long drink. "You know what bugs me, though?" "What?" "You never showed any emotion through this whole thing. Not rage, not grief, nothing. It's like you were made of ice." Devin considered this. "I learned a long time ago that emotion makes you sloppy. When I was working homicide, the cases that went cold were the ones where we let anger or grief drive our decisions. The ones we solved were the ones where we stayed cold, calculated, patient. But this was your family." "Exactly. Which is why I couldn't afford to be emotional. I had to be perfect. No mistakes, no second chances. They came after my son. The only acceptable outcome was complete victory." Kurt nodded slowly. "Well, you got it. Total victory. Clinton destroyed, Brenda destroyed, Orozco locked up, their families ruined, your business thriving, Jake safe and healing. You couldn't have planned it better." "I did plan it that well," Devin said quietly. "Every step. From the moment I saw that security footage, I knew exactly how this would end. I just had to execute." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the street lights flicker on as dusk fell. Chapter 9. The Long Game. 1 year later, Devin stood in the visitors area of the Federal Correctional Facility in Texas. Clinton Dunbar shuffled in, wearing prison blues, his once polished appearance now completely eroded. Prison had aged him 20 years. Gray hair, gaunt face, the arrogant confidence replaced by hollow defeat. "Why are you here?" Clinton asked, sitting across from Devin. "Closure," Devin said. "I wanted to see how you were adjusting." "Adjusting." Clinton laughed bitterly. "I wake up every day in hell." "Is that what you wanted to hear?" "Partly. But I also wanted to tell you something you might find interesting. Remember your board of directors at Dunbar Industries? The ones who sold me their stock. What about them? They're all doing quite well now. Riverside Manufacturing paid out dividends last quarter. They made their money back, and then some. Some of them even thanked me for saving their investments." Clinton's jaw clenched. "You're rubbing it in?" "No, I'm making a point. You had everything: money, power, respect. And you threw it away because you couldn't handle one business setback. Instead of rebuilding legitimately, you decided to murder a child for insurance money. That's not ruthless business strategy. That's just evil stupidity. I was desperate. You were weak. And now you're paying the price." Devin leaned forward. "Here's what's going to happen. You'll serve your 40 years. Maybe you'll die in here. Maybe you'll get out at 85, broken and forgotten. Brenda's in the same boat. Orozco's looking at parole in 11 more years, but he'll be a middle-aged ex-con with no prospects. And you, Jake and I are doing great. He's 11 now, straight A student, star pitcher on his little league team. He's seeing a therapist, processing everything that happened. He asked about you last week. Actually, what did he ask? He wanted to know if you felt sorry for what you did. I told him probably not. That people like you don't really feel remorse. Was I right?" Clinton stared at him, and Devin saw the truth in his eyes. No remorse. Only self-pity and rage of being caught. "That's what I thought," Devin said. "Jake's a smart kid. He understands that sometimes bad people exist, and all we can do is make sure they can't hurt anyone else. You taught him that lesson in the worst way possible, but he's stronger for it. I hope he grows up knowing what his father really is," Clinton spat. "A manipulative bastard who destroyed people." "No," Devin corrected. "I destroyed people who tried to murder my son. There's a difference. And Jake knows exactly what I am. A father who protected his child and made sure justice was served. He's proud of me. Can you say the same about your family?" Clinton looked away, and Devin knew he'd struck the final blow. Clinton's parents had died without reconciling with him. His sister wouldn't take his calls from prison. He was alone, completely and utterly. Devin stood. "I won't visit again. This is goodbye, Clinton. Enjoy the next 40 years. He walked out without looking back. Outside, Jesse was waiting in the parking lot, leaning against Devin's car. How'd it go? Jesse asked. Exactly as expected. He's broken. Good. Jesse handed him a folder. Wedding invitation came to your office. I signed for it. Devin opened it. Dr. Margaret Arnold, the ER doctor who'd saved Jake's life, was getting married. She'd become a friend over the past year, checking in on Jake regularly. The invitation was personal, warm. You going? Jesse asked. Yeah, Jake and I both. She's been good to us. They drove back to Detroit in comfortable silence. Devin thought about the long road he'd traveled. From that terrifying call about Jake collapsing, through the investigation, the trial, the systematic destruction of everyone who'd threatened his family. It had taken patience, intelligence, and a willingness to play the long game. But it had been worth it. Jake was waiting at home, excited because his team had won their game that afternoon. Devin listened to his son's play-by-play description of the final inning, laughing at Jake's dramatic reenactment of the winning strikeout. Later that night, after Jake was asleep, Devin sat in his home office and looked at the wall where he'd kept his investigation board during the darkest days. It was clean now, repainted, holding pictures of Jake's baseball team instead of surveillance photos and evidence timelines. He opened his bottom desk drawer and pulled out a file, the only remaining record of the investigation, the parts that would never see a courtroom. The evidence of exactly how he'd manipulated Clinton into coming back from the Caymans. The planted stories, the false rumors, the carefully orchestrated pressure campaign. The way he'd ensured Clinton was placed in general population. The anonymous tips that had destroyed Whitney Draper's life. Devin had spent 12 years as a cop learning that the system was imperfect. It caught most criminals, but the smart ones, the rich ones, the ones who could afford good lawyers, they often slipped through. He'd seen murderers walk on technicalities, seen victims denied justice because of procedural errors. He'd vowed, then, that if anyone ever came after his family, he wouldn't rely solely on the system. He'd use it, manipulate it, guide it to the outcome he needed. He'd become the chess player, moving pieces until checkmate was inevitable. And he'd won. Devin lit a match and held it to the file, watching the papers catch fire. He dropped them into a metal wastebasket, watching years of careful planning and calculated revenge burn to ash. There was no evidence now, nothing to connect him to the extra-legal aspects of Clinton and Brenda's destruction. Just a father who'd protected his son, using nothing but legal means in legitimate investigation. The fire burned out. Devin dumped the ashes in the trash, then went upstairs. He checked on Jake, still sleeping peacefully, a baseball clutched in one hand, even in sleep. Devin smiled. This was victory, not the destruction of his enemies, though that had been necessary. Not the success of his business, though that was gratifying. Not even the justice served by the courts, though that mattered. Victory was his son, safe and happy, dreaming of baseball games and summer vacations, unburdened by the darkness that had tried to consume him. Everything else was just cleanup. Devin turned out the light and went to bed, the long game finally over, won on every front that mattered. And in a federal prison in Texas, in a women's correctional facility in Michigan, and in a county jail awaiting transfer, 3 people who'd underestimated the quiet security consultant learned the price of threatening the wrong family. They would pay that price for the rest of their lives. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Facade. Julian Briggs had built his life on precision and control. At 34, he owned 3 successful automotive repair shops across Portland, each one a testament to his belief that excellence came from attention to detail and unwavering standards. His hands, scarred from years of working with metal and machinery, could diagnose an engine problem by sound alone or strip down a transmission blindfolded. Julian had learned early that the world rewarded men who could fix things that others couldn't or wouldn't. His father, Moses Briggs, had been a mechanic who drank away his talent and died broke. Julian had sworn he'd never follow that path, building his business through 18-hour days and a reputation for brutal honesty with customers. He'd met Joan Green at a charity auction 5 years ago. She'd been volunteering for a children's organization, her warm smile and apparent devotion to helping kids drawing him like a magnet. Joan was beautiful in an understated way. Auburn hair, green eyes that seemed to sparkle with genuine kindness, and a laugh that made other people want to smile. She worked as a part-time school counselor and spent her free time organizing fundraisers for local children's charities. Their courtship had been a whirlwind. Joan seemed to understand Julian's drive for success while grounding him with her compassion. When she'd become pregnant with Emma, just 6 months after their wedding, Julian had felt his life clicking into perfect alignment. He had a thriving business, a beautiful wife who shared his values, and soon, a daughter to carry on the family name. Emma Briggs was the light of Julian's world. At 5 years old, she had inherited her mother's delicate features but her father's stubborn determination. She could spend hours in his workshop, carefully organizing his tools or helping him work on cars with her own set of toy wrenches. Julian treasured these moments, seeing in Emma the possibility of someone who might understand both his drive for excellence and his capacity for love. The only shadow in Julian's carefully constructed life was the demands of his business. Success required sacrifice, and increasingly, that meant extended trips to evaluate potential new locations or handle complex restoration projects. Joan had been understanding, even encouraging, about these trips. She'd insisted she could handle everything at home, that Emma barely noticed when Daddy was away for a few days. Julian had believed her. Why wouldn't he? Joan was a school counselor trained to work with children. She volunteered with children's charities. Every interaction he'd witnessed between Joan and Emma had seemed loving and appropriate. If anything, Julian sometimes worried that Joan was too soft with Emma, too willing to let their daughter get away with minor misbehavior. This particular business trip to San Francisco had lasted 4 days, longer than usual because the vintage Mustang he'd been restoring had revealed hidden damage that required sourcing rare parts. Julian had called home every evening, and Joan had sounded cheerful and relaxed. Emma had seemed happy during their brief conversations, chattering about her day at kindergarten and asking when Daddy would be home. Julian pulled into his driveway at 6:30 p.m. on a gray October Thursday, the trunk of his BMW loaded with the parts he'd finally tracked down. The house looked normal from the outside, lawn neatly maintained, Joan's Honda Civic in its usual spot, warm light glowing from the kitchen windows. It was the picture of domestic tranquility that Julian had worked so hard to create. He used his key to enter through the front door, calling out as he always did, "I'm home. Where are my girls?" Joan's voice drifted from the living room, carrying an odd note that Julian couldn't immediately identify. "Oh, Julian, you're early. I wasn't expecting you for another hour." Julian set down his travel bag and walked toward the living room, already looking forward to sweeping Emma into his arms and hearing about everything she'd done while he was away. But the scene that greeted him stopped him cold. Emma lay on the couch, her small body unnaturally still, her breathing so shallow that Julian had to look closely to see her chest moving at all. Her usually bright eyes were closed, and there was a grayish pallor to her skin that made Julian's stomach clench with sudden fear. "What's wrong with Emma?" Julian demanded, rushing to the couch. Joan, who had been sitting in the armchair, scrolling through her phone, looked up with an expression of casual annoyance. "She's fine, just tired. She had a bit of a tantrum earlier, so I had to discipline her." Julian knelt beside the couch, his hands hovering over Emma's still form. Her skin was cold to the touch, and when he gently shook her shoulder, she barely responded, just a slight flutter of her eyelids. "Joan, she's not okay. She's barely conscious." Joan laughed, a sound that sent ice through Julian's veins. It was a laugh completely devoid of maternal concern, casual and dismissive. "She was being bad, so I just disciplined her a little. Don't be so dramatic." Julian stared at his wife, seeing a stranger. The warm, caring woman he'd married seemed to have vanished, replaced by someone cold and irritated by his concern for their daughter. What kind of discipline? What did you do to her? Nothing she didn't deserve, Joan replied, returning her attention to her phone. She was being disrespectful, talking back, making a mess. I told her to go to her room, and she refused. So I made sure she understood that mommy doesn't tolerate defiance. Julian's hands were shaking as he checked Emma's pulse. Too fast, too weak. Her skin was clammy, and when he lifted her eyelid, her pupil's response was sluggish. Every instinct screamed that Emma needed immediate medical attention. I'm calling 911, Julian said, pulling out his phone. You're overreacting, Jones said coldly. She's just sleeping it off. Kids bounce back quickly. But Julian was already dialing, his mind cataloging Emma's symptoms with the same analytical precision he applied to diagnosing mechanical problems. Shallow breathing, weak pulse, unresponsiveness, pallor. These weren't signs of a child who'd been sent to her room. These were signs of a child in medical distress. As he spoke to the 911 dispatcher, Julian watched Joan from the corner of his eye. She wasn't panicking or showing any concern for Emma. Instead, she seemed annoyed by the disruption, sighing dramatically and shaking her head as if Julian was making a fuss over nothing. The paramedics arrived within 8 minutes, 2 experienced EMTs who moved with practiced efficiency. But as they entered the living room and saw Joan sitting calmly in her chair, something changed in their demeanor. Julian caught the look that passed between them, a recognition that made his blood turn cold. One of the paramedics, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, began examining Emma while his partner quietly approached Julian. In a voice so low that Joan couldn't hear, he whispered in Julian's ear, "Sir, your wife is someone we've encountered before. Not here, but there are reports. You need to know that what you're seeing isn't normal parental discipline." The words hit Julian like a physical blow. Reports. Other incidents. Other children. As the paramedics worked to stabilize Emma, loading her onto a stretcher with professional urgency, Julian felt something fundamental shift inside him. The life he'd built, the trust he'd placed, the future he'd envisioned. All of it crumbled in the space of those whispered words. Joan followed them to the hospital, playing the part of the concerned mother for the medical staff. But Julian saw through the performance now. He watched her carefully, noting the moments when she thought no one was looking, seeing the coldness return to her eyes, the irritation that flickered across her face when doctors asked detailed questions about Emma's condition. And Julian Briggs, a man who had built his reputation on fixing things that seemed beyond repair, began to plan how he would fix this permanently. Chapter 2. Uncovering the Truth. The pediatric ICU at Portland General Hospital hummed with the quiet efficiency of life-saving machinery. Emma lay in the small bed, dwarfed by monitors and 4 lines, her breathing finally steady but still too shallow for Julian's peace of mind. Dr. Helena Matthews, the attending physician, had been professionally thorough but carefully neutral in her explanations of Emma's condition. "She's stable now," Dr. Matthews had said, but she came in with signs of acute respiratory depression and mild hypothermia. "We're running additional tests to determine the cause." Julian had pressed for details, but the doctor's responses had been cautious, clinical. It wasn't until Jones stepped out to get coffee that Dr. Matthews returned to Emma's room with a different expression entirely. "Mr. Briggs, I need to speak with you privately," she said, closing the door behind her. Emma's blood work came back. She has traces of diphenhydramine in her system, a significant amount. Diphenhydramine, Benadryl. In large doses, it can cause exactly what you found: respiratory depression, altered consciousness, hypothermia. An adult dose, given to a child Emma's size, could be very dangerous. Julian felt the floor shift beneath him. "You're saying someone gave Emma an overdose of Benadryl?" Dr. Matthews nodded grimly. "I'm required to report this to Child Protective Services. Mr. Briggs, I need you to understand that this wasn't an accident. The amount in Emma's system suggests deliberate administration of multiple adult doses." As if summoned by the revelation, A CPS caseworker named April Moss arrived within the hour. She was a woman in her 40s with tired eyes that had seen too much, and she spoke with the careful precision of someone who dealt with the worst aspects of human nature daily. "Mr. Briggs, we need to discuss some concerns about your wife," April said, settling into the uncomfortable hospital chair beside Emma's bed. "This isn't the first time Joan Briggs has come to our attention." The words confirmed Julian's worst fears. "What do you mean?" April consulted her tablet. Before she was married, Joan Green was investigated twice for suspected child abuse. Once when she was a teacher's aide in Beaverton, and once when she was a nanny for a family in Lake Oswego. Both cases were closed due to insufficient evidence, but the patterns were concerning. What patterns? Children in her care would become mysteriously ill or injured, always when other adults weren't present. Always with explanations that seemed plausible on the surface, but didn't quite add up when examined closely. Julian's hands clenched into fists. Why wasn't I told about this before we got married? The records were sealed when the investigations were closed. And Joan was careful. She never stayed in one position long enough for a clear pattern to emerge. She'd moved to a new job, a new city, a fresh start. Dr. Matthews spoke up. "There's something else, Mr. Briggs. Emma has old injuries that weren't mentioned in her medical history. Healed fractures in her ribs, scarring consistent with burns. These injuries occurred over time, probably during periods when you were away on business." The revelation hit Julian like a sledgehammer. While he'd been working to build a better life for his family, Joan had been systematically abusing their daughter. Every business trip, every night he'd worked late, every moment he'd trusted Joan to care for Emma had been an opportunity for violence. "There's more," April continued. "We've been monitoring Joan's online activity since the investigation began. She's been participating in forums that, well, they've discussed methods of disciplining children that go far beyond normal parenting." Julian's vision blurred with rage. "What kind of forums?" "Groups that believe in extreme physical discipline. Some of the participants share techniques for avoiding detection, for making injuries look accidental, for—" April paused, studying Julian's face. "For making children compliant through fear and pain." Julian stood abruptly, walking to the window that overlooked the hospital parking lot. Below, he could see Joan talking animatedly on her phone, pacing back and forth with an energy that seemed completely inappropriate given their daughter's condition. "Mr. Briggs, we're going to need to remove Emma from your home temporarily," April said gently, "until we can complete a full investigation." "No." Julian's voice was quiet but absolute. "Emma stays with me. Joan is the problem, not the home. I understand your position, but—" "April." Julian turned from the window, and something in his expression made the caseworker stop mid-sentence. "I own 3 businesses. I have no criminal record, and until today, I had no knowledge of my wife's actions. Emma stays with me, and Joan leaves. That's not a request." April studied Julian's face for a long moment. "Mr. Briggs, I need to be clear about something. If Joan is as dangerous as we suspect, removing her from your home won't be simple. People like her don't just accept defeat and walk away. Then we'll have to make sure she doesn't have a choice." Dr. Matthews cleared her throat. "Mr. Briggs, there's one more thing you should know. The paramedic who spoke to you earlier, Werner Randall, he asked me to give you this when you were ready." She handed Julian a business card with Werner's personal cell phone number written on the back. Below the number, in neat handwriting, were the words, "I know someone who can help." Julian pocketed the card, his mind already working through possibilities. He'd built his business by understanding systems, how they worked, where they broke down, how to fix them when conventional methods failed. Joan Briggs had become a system failure that threatened everything he valued. And Julian Briggs had never met a problem he couldn't solve, given enough time and the right tools. Through the window, he watched Joan end her phone call and head back toward the hospital entrance. She was smiling now, the expression of someone who believed she'd successfully managed a crisis. But Julian could see what she couldn't: security cameras tracking her movement, hospital staff who'd been briefed on the situation, systems already turning against her. Joan Green Briggs had made her last mistake. She'd hurt Emma for the final time. And Julian was going to make sure she understood exactly what that mistake would cost her. As Emma stirred in her hospital bed, her eyes fluttering open for the first time since Julian had found her, he made a promise that echoed the vows he'd taken when she was born. He would protect her, no matter what it took. And he would make sure that the woman who'd masqueraded as her mother paid for every moment of pain she'd inflicted. The game was about to change, and Joan had no idea that she was no longer playing against a trusting husband. She was playing against a man who fixed broken things for a living. And Joan Briggs was about to be permanently repaired. Chapter 3. The Network Emerges. Emma's recovery was swift once the Benadryl was out of her system, but the psychological damage ran deeper than any physical injury. She clung to Julian with desperate intensity, flinching whenever Joan tried to approach her bed. The child's instinctive fear of her own mother told Julian everything he needed to know about the scope of Joan's abuse. "Daddy," Emma whispered during one of the moments when Joan had stepped out, her small hand gripping Julian's finger with surprising strength. "I don't want to go home if Mommy's there." Julian's heart broke and hardened simultaneously. "She won't hurt you anymore, sweetheart. Daddy promises." Warner Randall arrived that evening, officially to check on Emma's condition, but actually to have a very different conversation with Julian. The paramedic was a man in his 50s with the weathered face of someone who'd seen humanity at its worst, and his eyes held a knowledge that made Julian pay attention. "Mr. Briggs, we need to talk somewhere private," Warner said quietly. "There are things about your wife that you need to understand." They met in a hospital cafeteria after visiting hours, the nearly empty space providing enough background noise to mask their conversation. Warner carried a thick folder that he placed carefully on the table between them. "Joan Green, or whatever name she was using before, she's not just an abusive parent," Warner began. "She's part of something larger, something organized." Julian opened the folder to find police reports, medical records, and photographs that made his stomach clench. Children with injuries that had been explained away, families that had been destroyed, cases that had been quietly closed or overlooked. "I've been tracking patterns like this for 15 years, Warner continued. "There's a network of people who target families, insert themselves into positions of trust, and then exploit that access. Some do it for money, some for power, and some—" Warner's voice hardened. "Some do it because they enjoy hurting children." The photographs showed children in various states of injury and distress. Some Julian recognized from Joan's charity work. Kids she'd claimed to be helping, children she'd had access to through her volunteer positions. The forum that CPS mentioned, Julian said, the pieces clicking together. It's not just about discipline techniques. It's a recruitment and coordination tool. They share techniques for gaining access to children, methods for avoiding detection, and targets for future operations. Warner pulled out his phone and showed Julian a screenshot of a conversation thread. "Look at this." The messages were coded but clear enough to Julian's analytical mind. Joan had been reporting on Emma's schedule, Julian's travel plans, and their family's routines. She'd been sharing detailed information about when Emma would be vulnerable, when Julian would be away, when opportunities for discipline would arise. "There are others involved," Warner continued. "People who help provide cover, who offer alibis, who can make investigations disappear. Your wife isn't working alone." Julian studied the network map that Warner had constructed, seeing connections between Joan and several other individuals in Portland. School officials who had access to children's records, medical professionals who could explain away injuries, even law enforcement contacts who could influence investigations. "Why are you showing me this?" Julian asked. Warner's smile was grim. "Because the system isn't equipped to handle this kind of organized abuse. These people are too smart, too connected, too careful. They've learned how to work within the system's limitations. And you think I should work outside the system? I think you should consider all your options." Warner slid another business card across the table. "Moses Kane. He's a private investigator who specializes in cases like this. He's also someone who understands that sometimes justice requires creativity." Julian pocketed the card, his mind already working through possibilities. "What do you know about Joan's current activities?" "She's panicking." Since Emma was hospitalized, she's been making calls to her contacts, trying to coordinate a response. They're planning to discredit you. Claims about your mental state, questions about your fitness as a father, suggestions that you're the one who hurt Emma. The revelation didn't surprise Julian. He'd seen Joan's ability to manipulate perception, to present herself as the victim while destroying others. But now he understood that it wasn't just personal skill. It was training and support from others with the same agenda. There's something else, Werner said, lowering his voice even further. Joan's been grooming Emma for something beyond simple abuse. The network has clients, people who pay for access to children. Emma was being prepared for sale. Julian's hands went very still on the table. The words hit him with the force of a physical blow, but instead of breaking him, they crystallized his resolve into something diamond-hard and unbreakable. "I need names," Julian said quietly. "Moses can get you everything. Names, locations, financial records, communication logs." "But Julian," Werner leaned forward. "Once you start down this path, there's no going back. These people destroy lives for a living. They won't hesitate to destroy yours." Julian thought about Emma's small hand gripping his finger, about her whispered fear of going home with Joan, about the terror in her eyes whenever her own mother approached. He thought about the children in the photographs, the families that had been destroyed, the network of predators that had been operating with impunity. "They already destroyed my life," Julian said. "They just didn't know they were leaving behind someone who could fix what they broke." Werner nodded, understanding passing between them. "Moses is expecting your call. But Julian, be very careful who you trust. This network has people everywhere, and they're going to be watching you closely." As Julian returned to Emma's room, he found Joan sitting beside their daughter's bed, stroking Emma's hair with fake tenderness while speaking in a soothing voice that made Julian's skin crawl. Emma lay rigid and silent, her eyes fixed on the ceiling, enduring her mother's touch with the resignation of a child who had learned that resistance only made things worse. "They're my strong girl," Joan was saying. "Mommy's here, and everything's going to be fine. Daddy's just confused right now, but we'll help him understand." Julian watched from the doorway, seeing the performance for what it was, a calculated display designed to maintain Joan's cover while reinforcing her control over Emma. But now Julian could see the predator behind the maternal mask, and he began planning how to remove that mask permanently. Joan Briggs had spent years building a network of people who helped her hurt children. But Julian Briggs was about to build a network of his own, one dedicated to making sure that Joan and her associates never hurt another child again. The war was beginning, and Joan had no idea that she'd just armed her most dangerous enemy with everything he needed to destroy her. Chapter 4: Building the Arsenal. Moses Kane operated from an office above a gun shop in southeast Portland, the kind of place that didn't advertise and required an appointment to visit. Julian found him exactly where Werner had said he'd be, a man in his early 60s with the build of a former boxer and eyes that missed nothing. "Werner told me about your situation," Moses said without preamble, gesturing for Julian to sit in a chair that had seen better decades. "I've been tracking Joan's network for 3 years. She's careful, but not careful enough." Moses spread out files across his desk, surveillance photos, financial records, communication intercepts, and behavioral analyses that painted a picture of methodical evil. Joan's network extended far beyond what Julian had imagined, reaching into schools, hospitals, child services, and law enforcement. The beauty of their system, Moses explained, is that each person only knows their immediate contacts. Joan knows maybe 6 or 7 people directly, and they each know 6 or 7 others. If one person gets caught, they can't bring down the whole network. Julian studied the organizational chart Moses had constructed. But if you target the right people, you can create cascading failures that destroy multiple cells at once. Moses smiled grimly. The trick is identifying the critical nodes and then applying pressure in the right sequence. Moses pulled out a tablet and showed Julian video footage of Joan meeting with various individuals over the past year. A school administrator named Clifford Holmes who had access to student records. A pediatric nurse named Deidre Bentley who could falsify medical reports. a CPS supervisor named Felton Irwin who could influence investigations. Each of these people has weaknesses, Moses continued. Holmes is embezzling from the school district's emergency fund. Bentley has been stealing prescription medications. Irwin has been taking bribes to make cases disappear. You want to use their crimes against them. I want to give you options. Moses leaned back in his chair. The legal system would take years to prosecute these people, assuming they could even build cases that would stick. And while that's happening, more children get hurt. Julian understood the implication. You're talking about vigilante justice. I'm talking about efficiency. These people have declared war on innocent children. I'm suggesting you respond with appropriate force. Moses opened another file, this one containing detailed profiles of Jones' network members. Personal histories, family information, financial vulnerabilities, psychological weak points, everything needed to destroy someone's life methodically and completely. Warner mentioned that Jones been preparing Emma for sale, Julian said. Moses's expression darkened. There's a buyer lined up, a man named Porter Cannon who runs a private school in California. He's been paying Joan for access to children through her volunteer work, and Emma was going to be the premium offering. Julian's hands clenched involuntarily. Where is he now? San Francisco, but he's planning to visit Portland next week to evaluate the merchandise. Moses watched Julian's reaction carefully. This gives us an opportunity. What kind of opportunity? Moses smiled, but it was an expression devoid of warmth. The kind where Porter Cannon never hurts another child, and his death sends a message to everyone else in the network. The conversation continued for 2 hours, with Moses laying out a comprehensive plan for dismantling Jones' entire operation. It involved blackmail, extortion, strategic violence, and psychological warfare, tools that the legal system couldn't or wouldn't use, but that would be devastatingly effective against people who relied on secrecy and impunity. There's one more thing you should know, Moses said as their meeting concluded. Jones been in contact with someone who claims to have information about your business. They're planning to frame you for tax evasion or some other financial crime, something that would destroy your credibility and make it easier to take Emma away from you. Julian wasn't surprised. He'd built his businesses carefully and legally, but he understood that documents could be falsified and accusations could be made that would require expensive legal defense, even if ultimately disproven. Do you know who? Someone with access to financial records and the ability to manipulate them. I'm still tracking down the specifics, but they're moving fast. You probably have a week before they make their move. Julian left Moses' office with a clear understanding of what he was facing and what his options were. Jones' network was sophisticated and dangerous, but it was also vulnerable to someone who understood how to apply pressure in the right places. That evening, Julian returned to the hospital to find Emma awake and alert, her color finally returning to normal. Joan was there too, playing the role of concerned mother for the medical staff, but Julian could see the calculation behind her performance. How's our little girl doing? Julian asked, deliberately using the possessive pronoun to gauge Joan's reaction. Much better, Joan replied smoothly. The doctors say she should be able to come home tomorrow. Julian nodded, but privately he was already making different arrangements. Emma wouldn't be going home with Joan. Not tomorrow, not ever. But Joan didn't need to know that yet. As Julian tucked Emma into her hospital bed that night, she whispered a question that broke his heart. Daddy, why does Mommy hurt me? Because she's sick, sweetheart, Julian replied, his voice gentle but his resolve absolute. But Daddy's going to make sure she can't hurt you anymore. Promise? I promise. And Julian Briggs always kept his promises, no matter what the cost. Outside Emma's room, Joan was on her phone again, speaking in urgent whispers to someone Julian couldn't identify. But thanks to Moses's surveillance equipment, every word was being recorded, adding to the evidence that would soon destroy Joan's entire world. The network that had protected Joan was about to become her prison, and Julian was going to make sure that every person who had enabled the abuse of his daughter paid a price that would serve as a permanent deterrent to anyone else who might consider harming innocent children. The war had moved from intelligence gathering to active planning. Soon, it would move to execution. Chapter 5. The first strike. Dr. Helena Matthews signed Emma's discharge papers with obvious reluctance, her professional instincts warring with the legal requirements that she couldn't ignore. Emma was medically stable, and without concrete proof of ongoing abuse, the hospital couldn't justify keeping her longer. Mr. Briggs, I want you to understand that Emma is welcome back here anytime, for any reason, Dr. Matthews said quietly. Day or night. No questions asked. Julian understood the coded message. If Emma showed up at the hospital again with suspicious injuries, Dr. Matthews would make sure the investigation was thorough and immediate. Joan had spent the morning performing for CPS caseworker April Moss, presenting herself as a loving mother who was devastated by the accusations against her. She'd volunteered to undergo psychological evaluation, suggested family counseling, and even offered to temporarily reduce her contact with Emma to allow for healing. I just want what's best for my family, Joan had said, tears flowing on cue. If there's been some misunderstanding, some miscommunication, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix it. Julian watched the performance with cold appreciation for Joan's skill. She was convincing enough that April Moss was clearly having doubts about the severity of the situation. Joan understood that the system was designed to preserve families whenever possible, and she was exploiting that bias masterfully. But Julian had spent the morning implementing the first phase of Moses Kane's plan. Clifford Holmes, the school administrator who'd been helping Joan access children's records, arrived at his office that morning to find federal agents waiting with search warrants. The embezzlement investigation that Moses had triggered through carefully placed evidence would lead to Holmes's arrest by noon, effectively removing him from Joan's network while sending a clear message to the others. Deidre Bentley, the pediatric nurse who'd been falsifying medical reports, discovered that her drug theft had been reported to both the hospital administration and the state nursing board. Her license would be suspended pending investigation, and her access to vulnerable children would be permanently revoked. Felton Irwin, the CPS supervisor who'd been taking bribes, found himself under internal investigation for case tampering. The evidence Moses had gathered would ensure that Irwin was not only fired but criminally prosecuted. Joan received news of these developments through carefully monitored phone calls that Moses's surveillance equipment captured in detail. Julian could hear the panic in her voice as her support network began collapsing, but she maintained her facade in front of the hospital staff. I can't believe Clifford would steal from the school, Joan said to a nurse who'd commented on the news. He seemed like such a dedicated educator. But Julian saw the fear in Joan's eyes, the calculation as she tried to determine how much damage these arrests might cause to her position. She was smart enough to realize that 3 simultaneous investigations of her associates wasn't coincidence. The drive home from the hospital was tense. Emma sat in her car's seat between Julian and Joan, her small body rigid with anxiety. She hadn't spoken since leaving her room, and Julian could see the toll that maintaining her secret had taken on his daughter. Everything's going to be normal now, Joan said brightly, reaching back to pat Emma's knee. Mommy and Daddy are going to take extra special care of you. Emma flinched away from Joan's touch, and Julian saw his wife's mask slip for just a moment, a flash of irritation that disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. Once they arrived home, Julian implemented the next phase of the plan. While Joan was unpacking Emma's things, he made a phone call to his lawyer, Randolph Petty, initiating divorce proceedings with specific requests for emergency custody based on the medical evidence of Emma's abuse. Julian also activated a comprehensive surveillance system that Moses had installed throughout the house during Emma's hospitalization. Every room now contained hidden cameras and audio recording equipment that would document anything Joan might do to Emma when she thought they were unobserved. I need to run to the shop for a few hours, Julian announced after Emma had been settled in the living room with her favorite toys. There's an emergency with the Henderson restoration. Joan nodded, perhaps too eagerly. That's fine. Emma and I will have some quality time together, won't we, sweetheart? Emma's terrified expression told Julian everything he needed to know. Joan was planning to use this opportunity to re-establish control over their daughter, probably through intimidation and threats that wouldn't leave physical evidence. But Julian didn't actually leave. Instead, He parked around the corner and monitored the house through the surveillance system Moses had provided, watching and recording as Joan's true nature emerged the moment she believed she was unobserved. Within 10 minutes of Julian's supposed departure, Joan's demeanor changed completely. She approached Emma with cold efficiency, her voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "Now listen carefully, you little brat," Joan said, kneeling in front of Emma with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Daddy thinks he's very clever, but he doesn't understand how things really work. You're going to tell him that you made up those stories about Mommy hurting you. You're going to say you were confused and scared and didn't know what you were saying." Emma shook her head, tears streaming down her face. Joan's voice became even more menacing. "You will do exactly what Mommy tells you, or the nice men Mommy knows will come and take Daddy away forever. You'll never see him again, and then it will just be you and Mommy won't be nearly as nice as she has been." The threats continued for 20 minutes, escalating in severity and specificity. Joan described in detail what would happen to Emma if she didn't cooperate, painting vivid pictures of abandonment and isolation that were calculated to terrorize a 5-year-old into compliance. Julian recorded every word, his rage building but controlled by the knowledge that this evidence would be crucial in ensuring that Joan never had access to Emma again. But he also understood that Joan's threats represented immediate danger. She was preparing to escalate her abuse now that her network was under attack. The time for passive evidence gathering was over. Julian sent a text message to Moses Kane. "Initiate Phase 2. Target is active." Within an hour, Joan received a phone call that changed everything. Julian couldn't hear the conversation from his position, but he could see Joan's face through the surveillance feed as she received news that made her go pale with shock. Porter Cannon, the buyer who'd been planning to purchase access to Emma, had been found dead in his San Francisco hotel room. The apparent heart attack was actually the result of an untraceable toxin that Moses's contacts had administered during what appeared to be a routine room service delivery. More importantly, Cannon's death had triggered automatic releases of information he'd been holding as insurance against his own network contacts. Federal investigators were now in possession of detailed records of Cannon's activities, including his communications with Joan about Emma. Joan was now facing not just the collapse of her local support network, but federal investigation for child trafficking. The walls were closing in from multiple directions, and she was beginning to understand that someone was orchestrating her destruction with professional precision. Julian watched Joan pace frantically through the house, making increasingly desperate phone calls to contacts who were no longer answering. She was beginning to realize that her carefully constructed life was collapsing, but she still didn't understand who was responsible or how completely they had compromised her position. That evening, when Julian returned from work, he found Joan sitting at the kitchen table with Emma, both of them unnaturally still. Joan's smile was bright but strained, and Emma looked like she was barely breathing. "How are my girls today?" Julian asked, his voice casual despite the rage burning in his chest. "Perfect," Joan replied. "Emma and I had a wonderful talk about honesty and family loyalty. Didn't we, sweetheart?" Emma nodded, but Julian could see the terror in her eyes. Joan had successfully intimidated their daughter into silence, but the surveillance equipment had captured every threat, every manipulation, every moment of psychological abuse. Julian knelt down to Emma's level, his voice gentle but his eyes hard. "Emma, I want you to remember what Daddy told you at the hospital. No matter what anyone else says, Daddy will always protect you. Always." Emma's lower lip trembled, but she managed a small nod. Joan's mask slipped again, just for a moment, and Julian saw the predator calculating her next move. She was trapped, and she knew it, but she was still dangerous. Cornered animals often fought the hardest, and Julian understood that Joan's desperation might drive her to even more extreme measures. But Joan Briggs had made a fundamental miscalculation. She'd assumed that Julian was just another trusting husband who could be manipulated and controlled. She had no idea that she was now facing a man who had access to resources and contacts that operated far outside the legal system's constraints. The network that had protected Joan was gone. Her buyer was dead. Her local support had been eliminated. and Julian Briggs was just getting started. Chapter 6. The Trap Closes. Julian's lawyer, Randolph Petty, called at 7 a.m. with news that accelerated everything. The federal investigation into Porter Cannon's activities has produced evidence directly implicating Joan in child trafficking. FBI agents will be at your house with arrest warrants within the hour. Julian felt a moment of satisfaction, but it was tempered by tactical concerns. Will they have enough evidence to make charges stick? Between Cannon's records and the surveillance evidence Moses provided, Joan's looking at federal charges that carry mandatory minimum sentences of 20 years. But Julian, Randolph's voice carried a warning. Once the FBI is involved, your own activities need to be completely clean. Any evidence of vigilante action could compromise Emma's custody case. Julian understood. Phase 2 of Moses's plan had been successful. Joan's network was destroyed, and she was facing federal prosecution. But Phase 3, the permanent elimination of threats to Emma's safety, would have to wait until the legal system finished its work. Unless Joan gave them a reason to accelerate the timeline. Julian woke Emma early, explaining that they needed to pack a bag for a few days at Grandpa Moses's workshop. Emma's face lit up with the first genuine smile Julian had seen since the hospital. She loved spending time with Moses, who let her help with his investigations and taught her how to spot hidden cameras. Are we going to stay there? Emma asked hopefully. For a little while, sweetheart. Just until some grown-up things get sorted out. Joan emerged from the bathroom, looking haggard and anxious. She'd clearly been awake most of the night, probably making calls to contacts who were no longer answering. The federal investigation had made her network too dangerous for anyone to risk contact. Where are you going? Joan demanded as she saw Julian packing Emma's clothes. Emma's going to stay with my father for a few days. I think some space would be good for all of us. Joan's facade cracked. You can't take my daughter away from me. Emma isn't going anywhere permanently, Julian said calmly. But given everything that's happened, I think it's best if she stays somewhere she feels completely safe. The word safe hit Joan like a physical blow. She understood the implication, that Emma didn't feel safe in her own home with her own mother. Joan's eyes darted to Emma, who was carefully avoiding looking at her mother while clutching a stuffed animal that had been a gift from Julian. Emma, tell Daddy you want to stay home with Mommy, Joan said, her voice carrying the edge of threat that Julian now recognized. Emma shrank back against Julian's leg, her silence more damning than any accusation. Joan's control finally snapped. You ungrateful little brat. After everything I've done for you, everything I've sacrificed, and this is how you repay me. Julian stepped protectively in front of Emma, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Joan, you need to step back. Right now. But Joan was beyond rational thought. The pressure of the collapsing investigation, the federal charges looming, and the loss of control over Emma had triggered something primal and vicious. She's my daughter, Joan screamed. Mine. I carried her for 9 months. I gave birth to her, and no one is taking her away from me. Joan lunged toward Emma, but Julian was faster. He caught Joan's wrist in a grip that made her wince, his eyes cold as winter steel. You're done, Julian said quietly. You will never touch Emma again. The sound of car doors slamming outside interrupted the confrontation. Through the window, Julian could see federal agents surrounding the house with the precision of a military operation. Joan's face went white as she realized what was happening. FBI, open the door. Julian released Joan's wrist and stepped back, pulling Emma behind him. I'll get the door. Special Agent Isla Wise led the team of 6 agents who entered the house with weapons drawn but not aimed. She was a woman in her 40s with the bearing of someone who had spent years dealing with the worst crimes against children. Joan Green Briggs, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit child trafficking, conspiracy to commit child abuse, and multiple federal charges related to the exploitation of minors. Joan's mask finally fell away completely. As the agents read her rights and placed her in handcuffs, she turned to Julian with an expression of pure hatred. You think you've won, she snarled. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I have friends, connections, people who will make your life hell. Emma will never be safe as long as you're her father. Agent Wise stepped between Joan and Julian. "Ma'am, I advise you to stop talking. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court." But Joan was beyond caring about legal consequences. "Tell him about the insurance policy, Isla. Tell him what happens to people who interfere with our work." Agent Wise's expression hardened. "Ma'am, you're making threats against a federal witness. That's an additional felony charge." As the agents led Joan away, she twisted back to look at Emma one last time. "I'll be back, sweetheart. Mommy will always come back for her special little girl." Emma burst into tears, clinging to Julian with desperate strength. He lifted her into his arms, feeling her small body shake with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and damaged. Agent Wise remained behind after Joan had been taken away. "Mr. Briggs, we need to discuss security concerns. Joan's references to insurance policies and connections aren't idle threats. This network has resources we're still identifying." Julian nodded, understanding that Joan's arrest was just the beginning. "What kind of precautions are we talking about?" "Emma should stay somewhere secure until we can assess the full scope of the threat. These people have shown they're willing to target children to maintain control over their operations." Julian thought about Moses's workshop with its sophisticated security systems and defensible position. "I know somewhere safe." Agent Wise handed Julian her business card. "We'll need extensive interviews with Emma, but we'll work with child psychologists to minimize trauma. In the meantime, if anything unusual happens, anything at all, you call me immediately." As the FBI team finished processing the house as a crime scene, Julian packed more clothes for Emma and gathered important documents. The house that had once represented his vision of family happiness now felt contaminated, tainted by the knowledge of what had happened within its walls. Emma had stopped crying but remained silent, her eyes wide and watchful. Julian recognized the hypervigilant state of a child who had learned that safety was temporary and danger could emerge without warning. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Julian asked as they prepared to leave for Moses's workshop. Emma considered the question seriously. "I think so. But Daddy, what if Mommy comes back?" Julian knelt down to Emma's level, his voice gentle but absolutely certain. "Mommy is never coming back, Emma. Never. Daddy promises." "But she said she would." "Mommy said a lot of things that weren't true. But Daddy always tells you the truth, right?" Emma nodded. "Then trust me when I say that you will never have to be afraid of Mommy again." As they drove away from the house, Julian caught Emma watching it disappear in the rearview mirror. He understood that she was processing the end of one life and the beginning of another, a life where she would be protected by people who genuinely loved her rather than predators who had seen her as prey. But Julian also understood that Joan's threats weren't empty. The network she'd been part of had survived for years by eliminating threats and silencing opposition. Emma's safety would require more than federal protection. It would require the complete elimination of anyone who might seek to harm her. The legal system had Joan in custody, but the war was far from over. Chapter 7: The Gathering Storm. Moses Kane's workshop had been transformed into a fortress. Security cameras monitored every approach, motion sensors covered the perimeter, and the building's reinforced construction could withstand anything short of military assault. Emma seemed to flourish in the environment, fascinated by the surveillance equipment and comforted by the obvious security measures. "Look, Daddy," Emma said, pointing to a bank of monitors showing different angles of the building's exterior. "Uncle Moses can see everything." Moses smiled at the title Emma had given him. At 62, he'd never had children of his own, but Emma's resilience and intelligence had clearly won his affection. He'd set up a special workstation where she could help with simple investigative tasks, giving her a sense of purpose and control that Julian recognized was crucial for her recovery. Agent Isla Wise arrived that evening with disturbing news. "Joan's been making calls from the Federal Detention Center. Somehow she's gotten access to communication channels that shouldn't be available to her." Julian wasn't surprised. Her network had people in law enforcement. Some of them are probably still in place. "That's our concern. We've identified 7 current or former federal employees who received payments from accounts linked to Joan's operation. We're moving to arrest them, but in the meantime, Emma remains at significant risk. Agent Wise showed Julian intercepted communications that painted a clear picture of the threat they were facing. Joan's network had activated sleeper cells that had been dormant for years, calling in favors and resources that extended far beyond Portland. There were at least 12 individuals actively working to locate Emma, with instructions to eliminate anyone who tried to protect her. They're treating this as an existential threat to their entire operation, Agent Wise explained. Emma represents the only witness who can directly connect Joan to the systematic abuse, and her testimony could bring down hundreds of people across multiple states. Moses studied the intelligence reports with professional interest. They're using military-style coordination, cell structure, operational security, contingency planning. This isn't some amateur criminal enterprise. Julian felt a cold certainty settle in his chest. The legal system, despite its resources and good intentions, was not equipped to handle this level of organized threat. Federal agents could arrest the people they knew about, but they couldn't eliminate people they hadn't identified yet. What kind of timeline are we looking at? Julian asked. Agent Wise's expression was grim. Intelligence suggests they're planning to move within the next 48 hours. They know we're closing in on their network, so they're prioritizing Emma's elimination before we can complete the investigation. That night, after Emma had been tucked into the secure bedroom Moses had prepared for her, Julian sat down with Moses to discuss options that wouldn't be covered in any FBI briefing. The federal investigation is good for prosecuting the people they can catch, Moses said quietly. But it won't stop the people they can't find. Julian understood. You're talking about preemptive action. I'm talking about permanent solutions to permanent problems. Moses opened a secure laptop and showed Julian real-time surveillance of several individuals who were converging on Portland. These are professional killers, Julian. They specialize in eliminating witnesses, and they're very good at making deaths look accidental. The surveillance footage showed men and women who moved with the careful efficiency of people who killed for a living. They were staying in different hotels, using different identities, but Moses's network had tracked their movements and identified their likely target zone. How many? Julian asked. 12 that we've identified. Probably more that we haven't. Moses closed the laptop. The FBI can maybe stop half of them with arrests and surveillance. The other half will adapt and continue the mission. Julian thought about Emma sleeping in the next room, finally feeling safe for the first time in months. He thought about Joan's threats, about the network of predators that had operated with impunity for years, about the children who would continue to be hurt if this threat wasn't permanently eliminated. What are you proposing? Moses' smile was cold. I'm proposing that we solve this problem the way it should be solved. Completely and permanently. That's murder. That's war. They declared it when they started targeting children. We're just choosing to fight back with appropriate force. Julian considered the implications. Once he crossed this line, there would be no going back. He would become something different. Not just a father protecting his daughter, but a man willing to kill to ensure her safety. But Emma's safety was worth any price, any transformation, any moral compromise. Tell me the plan. Moses opened another laptop, this one showing detailed schematics of Portland's infrastructure. They're planning to hit us here, thinking they have us trapped. But this building has advantages they don't know about. Multiple exit routes, defensive positions, and access to the underground tunnel system that connects to the waterfront. The plan Moses outlined was complex but elegant. Instead of waiting for the killers to attack, they would draw them into a trap where they could be eliminated systematically. The building would become a killing ground, designed to give Moses and Julian every advantage while leaving their attackers vulnerable and exposed. What about Emma? She'll be in the most secure part of the building, with multiple escape routes if something goes wrong. But Julian, Moses met his eyes directly. If we do this, if we eliminate this threat permanently, you need to understand that we're not just protecting Emma. We're sending a message that will protect other children too. Julian understood. Every predator they killed tonight would be one less threat to innocent children. Every network member who died would serve as a warning to others who might consider similar crimes. When do we start? Moses checked his watch. They'll move at dawn. That gives us 6 hours to prepare. As Moses began setting up defensive positions and checking weapons, Julian returned to Emma's room. She was sleeping peacefully, her face relaxed in a way he hadn't seen since before Joan's arrest. She looked like the innocent child she deserved to be, safe and protected and loved. Julian made a promise to his sleeping daughter, the same kind of promise he'd made when she was born, but with a harder edge now. He would protect her from every threat, eliminate every danger, and ensure that she could grow up without fear. And if that meant becoming something darker than the man he'd been before, then Julian Briggs was ready to pay that price. The men and women coming to kill Emma would discover that they'd made a fundamental miscalculation. They thought they were hunting a frightened father and his daughter. Instead, they were walking into a trap set by people who understood that some fights could only be won through absolute victory. Dawn was coming, and with it, the final battle for Emma's future. Chapter 8: Blood and Steel. Julian had never killed a human being before, but as he watched the first assassin scale the fence surrounding Moses' compound, he felt no hesitation. The man moved with practiced stealth, his black tactical gear and suppressed rifle marking him as a professional killer sent to murder a 5-year-old girl. Emma was safely secured in the building's panic room, 3 levels underground with its own air supply and communication system. She thought it was an exciting game, playing with the surveillance equipment while Uncle Moses and Daddy worked on important business upstairs. Moses had chosen the building specifically for its defensive advantages. The main floor had multiple choke points that could be controlled by 2 people, while the upper floors provided elevated firing positions with clear fields of fire. The basement levels offered escape routes through tunnels that connected to the Portland Underground. First contact, East Perimeter. Moses whispered into his throat, Mike Male, approximately 6 feet, suppressed rifle, moving toward the loading dock. Julian took position at the second-floor window, his hunting rifle equipped with a scope that Moses had modified for urban combat. The assassin was good. He moved with the fluid efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. But he was also predictable, following approaches that Moses had anticipated and prepared for. Julian's shot took the man's center mass, dropping him instantly. The body fell behind a shipping container, invisible from the street, but clearly visible to the surveillance cameras that were recording everything. "One down," Julian reported, surprised by how calm his voice sounded. "2 more coming over the north fence," Moses replied. "I'll take the one on the left." Moses' shot was nearly silent, fired from a rifle that had been extensively modified to reduce both noise and muzzle flash. The assassin dropped without a sound, but his partner immediately went to ground, scanning for the source of the threat. Julian adjusted his position and fired again, his bullet finding its target despite the partial cover. The second assassin fell forward, his rifle clattering against the concrete. "Movement on the west side," Moses said. "Looks like they're trying to use the old truck for cover." Julian shifted to a different window, spotting 3 figures moving in coordinated bounds toward the building. These weren't amateurs. They moved with military precision, using cover effectively and maintaining communication discipline. But Moses had prepared for professional opposition. As the 3 assassins reached the truck, hidden charges detonated underneath it, creating a fireball that eliminated all 3 targets instantly while providing cover for any sounds the explosion might have masked. "That's 6 down," Moses said with satisfaction. "How many more do we expect?" Julian consulted the intelligence reports Agent Wise had provided. "At least 6 more, possibly 8. They'll be more cautious now." "Good. Cautious people make predictable mistakes." The next phase of the attack was more sophisticated. The remaining assassins had clearly realized they were facing prepared opposition, and they approached the building using tactics designed to overwhelm defensive positions through coordinated assault. Julian watched through the scope as 4 figures approached from different angles, moving with the kind of precision that suggested Special Forces training. These weren't street criminals or amateur killers. They were professionals who specialized in eliminating hard targets. But Moses Kane had been preparing for this kind of fight for 30 years. Initiating area denial, Moses said quietly. Hidden throughout the compound were devices that Moses had constructed from his military engineering background. Improvised claymore mines that could be triggered remotely to clear specific zones of approaching threats. As the four assassins reached predetermined positions, Moses activated the devices in sequence. The results were devastating and immediate. 3 of the 4 attackers were eliminated instantly, while the 4th was wounded but still mobile. Julian tracked the wounded assassin through his scope as the man tried to reach cover behind a parked car. The shot was difficult, nearly 200 yards through a chain-link fence, but Julian's hunting experience served him well. The bullet found its target, ending the threat permanently. "That's 10, Julian reported. "Motion sensors show 2 more approaching from the south," Moses said. "These ones are staying back, probably calling for reinforcements." Julian understood the tactical situation. The first wave of assassins had been eliminated, but the survivors would be reporting back to their controllers. More killers would be dispatched, better equipped, and better informed about the defensive capabilities they were facing. How long before backup arrives? Moses checked his surveillance feeds. Based on their communication patterns, I'd estimate 2 hours. Enough time to finish this and relocate Emma to secondary safe house. The final 2 assassins proved to be the most dangerous. Instead of approaching the building directly, they began firing from concealed positions nearly 300 yards away, using high-powered rifles to try to penetrate the building's defenses. Julian felt the building shake as bullets struck the reinforced walls. Moses had prepared for this too. The structure had been reinforced with steel plates and ballistic materials that could stop most rifle rounds. But sustained fire from multiple directions could eventually breach their defenses. "Time to go mobile," Moses said, gathering specialized equipment from a concealed weapons cache. Moses led Julian through the building's tunnel system, emerging from a camouflaged exit nearly 100 yards from the main structure. They now had the advantage of surprise, approaching the assassins from an unexpected direction while the killers focused their attention on the apparently occupied building. The final 2 eliminations were conducted with clinical efficiency. Moses and Julian approached the sniper positions from behind, using suppressed weapons to ensure that no alarm was raised. Both assassins died without knowing they'd been flanked. "That's 12, Moses said, checking his tablet to confirm that no motion sensors showed additional threats. "Area is clear." Julian felt a strange mixture of relief and transformation. In the space of 90 minutes, he'd killed 4 human beings and helped eliminate 8 others. He should have felt horror or revulsion, but instead he felt only satisfaction that the threat to Emma had been permanently removed. "We need to move fast," Moses said. "Law enforcement will respond to the explosions, and we need Emma relocated before they lock down the area." They returned to the building through the tunnel system, finding Emma exactly where they'd left her, safe in the panic room, playing with surveillance equipment, and completely unaware that a war had just been fought for her life. "Did you finish your work, Daddy?" Emma asked as Julian lifted her into his arms. "Yes, sweetheart. We're all done. Now we're going to take a trip to see the ocean." Emma's face lit up with excitement. "Can we build sandcastles?" "We can build whatever you want," Julian promised. As Moses drove them toward the safe house he'd prepared on the Oregon coast, Julian called Agent Wise to report that the immediate threat had been neutralized. He was careful not to mention specifics. The FBI would find 12 bodies and evidence of sophisticated defensive preparations, but nothing that directly implicated Julian or Moses in wrongdoing. The compound was attacked by unknown assailants, Julian reported. Moses's security systems apparently functioned as designed. "Emma and I are safe and relocating to an undisclosed location." Agent Wise's voice carried obvious relief. "We'll need full debriefings, but I'm glad you're safe." The Portland police are responding to reports of explosions and gunfire. "We'll cooperate fully with any investigation," Julian said. "But right now, my priority is ensuring Emma's continued safety." As they drove through the Oregon countryside toward their new temporary home, Julian reflected on how completely his life had changed. 3 weeks ago, he'd been a successful businessman with a seemingly perfect family. Now he was a man who had killed to protect his daughter, allied with people who operated outside the law, forever changed by the discovery of his wife's true nature. But Emma was safe. That was all that mattered. In the rearview mirror, Portland's lights faded into the distance, along with the life Julian had built and the man he used to be. Ahead lay an uncertain future, but one where Emma would be protected by people who understood that some threats could only be answered with absolute force. Joan's network was broken. Their assassins were dead, and Julian Briggs had learned that he was capable of anything necessary to protect the people he loved. Chapter 9: New Foundations. 6 months later, Julian stood on the deck of their new home overlooking the Pacific Ocean, watching Emma build an elaborate sandcastle with the focused intensity she brought to everything that mattered to her. The beach house in Cannon Beach was isolated enough to provide security while giving Emma the normal childhood she deserved. Emma had flourished since leaving Portland. The nightmares had gradually faded, replaced by genuine laughter and the fearless curiosity of a child who finally felt safe. She'd started kindergarten in the local school under a carefully constructed new identity that Moses had arranged, making friends and thriving academically. "Daddy, look," Emma called out, gesturing proudly at her architectural achievement. "It has a moat and everything." Julian walked down to admire her work, noting the strategic placement of defensive walls and the complex water management system she'd incorporated. Even in play, Emma showed signs of the analytical mind she'd inherited from him, combined with an intuitive understanding of protection and security that came from her experiences. "That's incredible, sweetheart. The princess in that castle will be very safe." Emma beamed with pride. "That's the point. Bad people can't get in, but good people always have a way to visit." The simple statement embodied the lesson Emma had learned, that safety and openness weren't mutually exclusive if you were smart about how you managed them. Agent Isla Wise visited once a month to check on Emma's well-being and provide updates on the legal proceedings. Joan had been convicted on federal charges and sentenced to life without parole, her network systematically dismantled through prosecutions that had reached into 12 states. The children who had been victims of the organization were receiving therapy and support, slowly healing from trauma that should never have been inflicted. "The investigation is officially closed," Agent Wise had reported during her last visit. "Every identified member of Joan's network is either in federal custody or confirmed deceased. There are no outstanding threats." The confirmed deceased category included the 12 assassins who had died at Moses's compound, officially listed as victims of unknown assailants during attempted break-in. The Portland police investigation had concluded that the deaths were the result of sophisticated security measures triggered by illegal entry, with no evidence of wrongdoing by the building's occupants. Moses had relocated to a cabin an hour inland, close enough to provide support, but far enough away to avoid drawing attention to Emma's location. He visited regularly, bringing Emma gifts that looked like toys but were actually educational tools, puzzles that taught surveillance techniques, games that developed threat assessment skills, books that explained how to recognize danger in disguise. "She's remarkably resilient," Moses had observed during one of their conversations. "But she's also hypervigilant in ways that could become problematic if not properly channeled." Julian understood. Emma's experiences had taught her to watch for threats and assess people's true motivations, skills that would serve her well, but that also carried the risk of preventing her from forming normal relationships. They'd address this through careful exposure to trustworthy adults and supervised interactions with other children, gradually teaching Emma that not everyone was dangerous, while maintaining her hard-won understanding that some people were. Julian's businesses had been sold to a competitor, the proceeds invested in legitimate enterprises that could be managed remotely while providing financial security for Emma's future. He discovered a talent for restoring classic boats, work that satisfied his need for precision while allowing him to remain close to Emma. The transformation hadn't been without cost. Julian understood that he was no longer the man he'd been before discovering Joan's true nature. He'd crossed lines that most people never approached, made choices that had permanent consequences, become someone capable of violence in defense of what mattered to him. But Emma was alive, safe, and thriving. That made every choice worthwhile. "Daddy, can we walk to the tide pools?" Emma asked as she put the finishing touches on her sandcastle. "Of course. Let's see what we can find." They spent the afternoon exploring the rocky coastline, Emma delighting in the discovery of sea anemones and hermit crabs, while Julian maintained the casual awareness that had become second nature. He noted the other people on the beach, assessed potential threats, planned escape routes, all while appearing to be nothing more than a father enjoying time with his daughter. That evening, as Emma worked on homework at the kitchen table, Julian's secure phone buzzed with a message from Moses. Package delivered to final destination. Julian understood the coded message. Werner Randall, the paramedic who had first alerted Julian to Joan's true nature, had tracked down the last remaining member of Joan's network, a man who had fled the country but had recently attempted to establish a new operation in Mexico. Moses's contact south of the border had ensured that the man would never threaten another child. Julian deleted the message without responding. Some communications were better left unacknowledged, and some justice was better delivered without fanfare. "Daddy, I finished my math homework," Emma announced. "Can you check it?" Julian reviewed Emma's work, noting her careful attention to detail and logical problem-solving approach. She was already showing signs of intellectual gifts that would serve her well in whatever future she chose. "Perfect, as always," Julian said, pulling Emma into a hug. "I'm proud of you, sweetheart. I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, Emma. More than anything in the world." As Julian tucked Emma into bed that night, she asked a question that had become part of their evening ritual. "Will you always keep me safe, Daddy?" "Always," Julian replied, his voice carrying the absolute certainty of a man who had proven he would kill to keep that promise. "No one will ever hurt you again." Emma smiled and closed her eyes, secure in the knowledge that her father's promises were unbreakable. Julian stood in the doorway for a moment, watching his daughter sleep peacefully in the bed he'd built for her,